45 minutes, author and ambassador Joe Wilson will be here to take your calls. In 2 hours, we'll focus on security at the upcoming Olympics in Greece. And in the final half hour, the fallout of last week's World Trade Organization decision on subsidies for U.S. cotton growers. All of that coming up in our 3-hour Washington Journal this morning. Here are the pictures that the Washington Post publishes this morning. They are not in any of the other newspapers. You can see this one. The cut line says a group of men lie naked and bound to one another on the walkway in front of the cells at Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad. Here's what the Washington Post says. They said that that these photos were mixed in with more than 1,000 digital photos obtained by the Washington Post. Photographs of naked men, apparently prisoners, sprawled on top of one another while soldiers stand around them. There's another photograph of a naked man with a dark hood over his head, handcuffed to a cell door. We're going to come down and show you that one next. And then over to the right, you will see another one, a naked man handcuffed to a bunk bed, his arms splayed so wide that his back is arched. A pair of women's underwear cover his head and face. The graphic images, according to this Post story, passed around among military police who served at the Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad are a new batch of photos similar to the ones that were released earlier. The front page of the Washington Post this morning is another one of those new photos, and it is of PFC Lindy England of the 372nd Military Police Company, an Army Reserve based in Crespatown, Maryland, holding a leash tied around a naked man's neck at Abu Ghraib prison. The photo was cropped for publication. All of these photos, according to the Washington Post, were cropped for publication. Later in the story, they talk a little bit about this woman, Lindy England of the 372nd. In Fort Ashby, West Virginia, 2 of her siblings and a friend identified her yesterday. She's 21 years old. She's a soldier appearing in this picture, and she was also identified in the reports that of some of the pictures you saw last week. They say her relatives have confirmed that this is her. She has been reassigned to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Her family said attempts to reach her were unsuccessful. The military has not charged her in the case. England's friends and relatives say that the photographs must have been staged. It just makes me laugh, says Destin Goyne, 21, a friend. She wouldn't pull a dog by its neck, let alone drag a human being across the floor. She was quoted as saying in a phone call, saying, "Mom, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time." That was a quote from her mother. That's all the pictures from the Washington Post this morning. No other newspapers have that, except they talk about a new list of, a new crop, rather, of photos being found and being published in the papers. We're going to concentrate in our first 45 minutes this morning on today's column by Thomas Friedman in the New York Times. He writes a little bit about his general thoughts on what needs to be done now under the headline, Restoring Our Honor. And he has a Let me read a little bit of what his column's about, and then we'll open up the phone lines to get your reaction to it. He says, we are in danger of losing something much more important than just the war in Iraq. We are in danger of losing America as an instrument of moral authority and inspiration in the world. I have never known a time in my life when America and its president were more hated around the world than today. Going down, he says, this administration needs to undertake a total overhaul of its Iraq policy. Otherwise, it is courting a total disaster for us all. And here he begins his 4 points that he makes in his today's column that we want to get your reaction to. First of all, he said, the overhaul needs to begin with President Bush firing Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld today, not tomorrow or next month. The Secretary of Defense, he writes later, is ultimately responsible, and if we are going to rebuild our credibility as instruments of humanitarian values, the rule of law and democratization in Iraq or elsewhere, Mr. Bush must hold his own defense secretary accountable. That's number one. Over here, number 2. He says Mr. Bush needs to invite to Camp David the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the heads of both NATO and the UN, and the leaders of Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. There, he needs to eat crow, apologize for his mistakes, and make clear that he is turning a new page. Then he needs to explain that we are losing in Iraq, and if we continue to lose, the U.S. public will eventually demand that we quit Iraq, and it will then become Afghanistan on steroids, which will threaten everyone. Next, he says we need to say that he will be guided, the president needs to say that he will be guided by the United Nations in forming the new caretaker government in Baghdad. And fourth, he says the president needs to explain that he is ready to listen to everyone's ideas about how to expand our force in Iraq and have it work under a new UN mandate so it will have the legitimacy it needs to crush any uprisings against the interim Iraqi government and oversee elections, and then leave when appropriate. And he needs to urge them all to join in.